On the day of our marriage alliance, Pei Yuhan, putting her E-Cup assets on display, put on airs as she negotiated terms with me. The Pei family will concede 3% profit. We divorce in 6 months. During these 6 months, you are not allowed to touch me. Looking at her self-righteous face, I backhanded her with a slap. She was stunned. You hit me? I followed up with another one, symmetrical now. She curled into the sofa, crying. I didn't bother comforting her. If that white moonlight of yours was actually worth anything, he would have eloped with you long ago. That night, I stood my ground and even went for 3 rounds. He Chong, the Pei family can concede another 3 percentage points. But you must promise me that we must divorce in 6 months, and you cannot touch me during this time. I looked at the woman before me, who spoke as if this were only natural, and was utterly shocked. A woman this thick-skinned and shameless was truly a rare find in this world. She sat elegantly on the sofa, her eyes filled with an innate coldness and a faint trace of melancholy, as if the nonsense she just spat out was nothing more than an ordinary negotiation. Pei Yuhan, the eldest daughter of the Pei family. Her capital was an E. Not financial capital, but real, genuine E-Cups. But so what? I raised my hand and swung without a moment's hesitation. Slap! A crisp sound echoed as the strike landed on her face, and 5 finger marks instantly surfaced on her fair skin. God damn it, I usually never hit women. But could someone who says such idiotic shit even be considered a woman? Pei Yuhan froze, her head still turned from the impact, her cheek turning red at a visible rate. In those cold eyes of hers, there was first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a torrential rage. Chong, you, how dare you hit me? Pei Yuhan bolted upright, her voice cracking and losing all of its previous poised elegance. Clutching her face, her eyes spat fire, and her chest heaved violently. Those E-Cup assets swayed with her breath, enough to make anyone's head spin. I dare you to hit me again. I laughed. Is there something wrong with her head? In all my years, I've never heard such a bizarre request. Fine by me. I raised my hand and granted her wish without hesitation. Slap. This time it was the other cheek. Now they matched. Pei Yuhan was completely shell-shocked. She stumbled back 2 steps, her knees hitting the sofa as she collapsed into it. Chong, have you gone crazy? You actually dare to hit me. Pei Yuhan curled into the sofa, hands covering her face, leaving only her eyes to glare at me. In those eyes, most of the anger had already faded, replaced by an expression I had never seen on her face. Fear. It was the bewilderment and terror of someone who had been overprotected since childhood and had never truly faced the harshness of the world, realizing for the first time. Someone actually dares to lay a hand on me. Since I was little, even my father never hit me. She murmured, her voice trembling as if talking to herself. No one ever dared to touch a finger on me. You actually slapped me twice. How dare you? How dare you? She clutched her face, her whole body trembling slightly. Looking at her like this, I actually laughed. How dare I? Of course I dared. Because our family's cooperation was based on mutual necessity. Because she wouldn't dare mention a single word about that white moonlight to her parents. Because the He family has never been a pushover that anyone could just squeeze at will. I withdrew my hand and looked down at her. Pei Yuhan, have you misunderstood something? She looked up, eyes rimmed with red, still trying to maintain her cold and haughty demeanor, but her swollen cheeks made the act look utterly ridiculous. This marriage is a matter of mutual benefit. I spoke one word at a time. Why didn't you bring up your white moonlight before the wedding? Uncle Pei dotes on you so much. He surely wouldn't have stood in your way. Her body stiffened. Speak up. You still there. Say it now, and I'll take you back to the Pei house immediately. We can hear what Uncle Pei has to say about it, right to his face. She lowered her head, her long hair cascading down and veiling half of her flushed cheek. Her voice was muffled, devoid of any confidence. I don't dare to say it. As expected. I nodded, not at all surprised. To put it bluntly, This woman was simply spoiled rotten. Raised in the lap of luxury, she had everything she ever wanted. She never had to worry about the family business or care about what anyone thought of her. That was why she could be so completely infatuated with that so-called white moonlight, believing that love could put food on the table and that the entire world revolved around her. So you understand perfectly well. I sat down across from her and crossed my legs. That so-called white moonlight of yours doesn't align with the Pei family's interests at all. At the very least, he can't provide the benefits this marriage alliance offers. Pei Yuhan bit her lip and remained silent. Don't forget, the He family is putting up exclusive mineral rights for 1 province and 5 cities. Do you understand what that means? I looked at her. What the Pei family is offering is money. I paused. But money is everywhere. When news of the alliance first broke, the Pei family was indeed in high demand. But do you know why we chose you? She looked up, a hint of confusion finally surfacing in her eyes. Because your grandfather and my grandfather have a good relationship. I gave a small smile. The Pei family was just one of many options. It just so happened that the 2 old men had a history, so the deal ultimately fell to the Peis. As for you, I looked her over, my gaze traveling from top to bottom, from her swollen cheek to her E-cup assets. Pei Yuhan, you are merely the bond to strengthen this cooperation. You are here to reduce unnecessary wariness between the 2 families. Nothing more. Pei Yuhan sat on the sofa, her face swollen and her eyes brimming with tears, yet she still forced herself to maintain that cold and haughty facade. He-chang, don't get too ahead of yourself. Her voice trembled, yet she struggled to maintain her final shred of stubbornness. Even if you're right, marriage is a matter between the 2 of us. If I'm unwilling, what can you do to me? She lifted her chin, tried to reclaim a bit of dignity with a gesture. You dare force me? I can sue you for marital. Before she could finish, I'd already stood up. Her words caught in her throat, and she instinctively shrank back. I walked over to her, leaned down, grabbed her wrist, and hauled her straight up from the sofa. What are you doing? Let go of me. Pei Yuhan panicked, struggling hard, her other hand desperately slapping at my arm. But with her meager strength, it wasn't even enough to count as a tickle. I exerted force in my arm and pulled her directly into my embrace. She let out a cry of surprise as she slammed into my chest. Those size E assets pressed hard against me, incredibly soft. He-chang, let me go. You bastard. She struggled like crazy, using both hands and feet, kicking and hitting. I wrapped one arm around her waist, pinning her in my arms, while my other hand pinched her chin, forcing her to look up at me. Move one more time. I stared into her eyes, emphasizing every word. And I'll give Uncle Pei a call to have a good talk about your white moonlight. Ji Buochang. Pei Yuhan froze completely. As if someone had pressed the pause button, all her struggling ceased instantly. She stared at me with wide eyes, the expression on her face a sight to behold. Anger, humiliation, terror, resentment. Various emotions intertwined before finally turning into pure grievance. How do you know? Her voice was as faint as a mosquito's buzz, her chin trembling slightly in my hand. I laughed. Who did you think you could hide those secrets from? I certainly wouldn't tell her that when the 2 families were discussing the marriage alliance, the Pei family had proactively laid out her background in full detail, including that man named Ji Buochang. The Pei elders weren't stupid. How could they not know their own daughter's little schemes? They just couldn't be bothered to expose them. Anyway, that man surnamed Ji has already been sent abroad. He won't be back for at least 6 months to a year. By the time he returns, it will be far too late. But there was no need to explain that to her. Pei Yuhan bit her lip, and the tears in her eyes finally couldn't be held back, rolling down. One drop, then 2. They slid down her red, swollen cheeks and dripped on the back of my hand. You're a bully. She choked out, her voice incredibly soft and broken. You're all bullying me. Looking at her like this, I felt a strange urge to laugh. Just a moment ago, she was carrying herself like a queen, and now she was acting like a dejected little girl. I'm bullying you. I let go of her chin and cupped her face in my hands instead. Pei Yuhan, don't you have things backward? You're the one who gave me all that bullshit about divorcing in a year and not being allowed to touch you. You're the one who treated this marriage like a joke first. She cried even harder, tears streaming down. I just didn't want to marry you. The one I love is Jibwachong. We promised to wait until he comes back. I laughed out of sheer frustration. Love? Then why didn't he elope with you? He has no money. Then why didn't he dare to marry into your family? He's afraid. Afraid of what? Pei Yuhan stopped talking and just cried. I let out a sigh. So your white moonlight has no money, no guts, and no ability. He relied on nothing but his mouth to coax you into staying pure for him. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, her lips moving, but she couldn't say a word. That's enough. I wiped the tears from her face. Stop crying. You look hideous, she sobbed, looking at me with a piteous, aggrieved expression. In her eyes, the anger and stubbornness had completely faded, leaving only helplessness and confusion. There was also a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps it was resignation, or perhaps it was something else entirely. I lowered my head and leaned in close. She instinctively tried to recoil, but my arm was locked around her waist, pinning her in place. Hee-chong, you, don't. Her voice trembled violently, and her breathing quickened. Her ample E-cup chest heaved with her gasps, brushing against me again and again. You think you're the one in charge. Without giving her a chance to respond, I leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were incredibly soft, tasting of the saltiness of tears and a subtle sweetness. Pei Yuhan went rigid in my arms, completely motionless. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. She let out a few muffled whimpers, but I smothered them completely. Her hands pressed against my chest, trying to push me away, but she couldn't muster even an ounce of strength. After a long moment, I released her. She slumped against me, gasping for air, her face flushed deep red. From her cheeks down to her neck, she was stained a soft pink. Hee-chong, you. I didn't give her a chance to finish. I bent down, hooked one arm behind her knees and the other around her waist, and swept her up into a princess carry. Hee-chong, what are you doing? Pei Yuhan shrieked in surprise, her hands instinctively wrapping around my neck. Ignoring her, I carried her toward the bedroom. Put me down. Let me go. She finally snapped out of it and began to struggle frantically in my arms, her legs kicking and her body twisting. I paused and looked down at her. Keep moving. She froze, but before she could react, I took direct action. He gripped her gills firmly. Pei Yuhan froze instantly, as if struck by an electric shock. Don't. Her voice changed pitch, and her face flushed at a visible speed, from her cheeks to the tips of her ears and down to her neck. Her eyes were wide, misty with moisture, filled with shame, anger, and helplessness. Why you? Take your hand away. Her voice was as faint as a mosquito's buzz, completely lacking conviction. Seeing her like this, I knew exactly what was going on. This woman was stubborn with her words, but her body was honest. By the time Pei Yuhan snapped back to her senses, she was already lying on that 3x3 massive bed. The mattress was imported, high performance, and perfectly firm. One would sink into it just a little upon lying down. She lay on her side, curled into a ball with her hands guarding her chest, watching me warily. Her eyes were red, tears still clinging to her lashes. Combined with her flushed cheeks, she looked pitiable. But in her gaze, the anger was gone, leaving only a thin layer of stubbornness, beneath which lay utter confusion and helplessness. Hee-chong. Her voice carried a sob, incredibly soft. Can you? Just this once. I stood by the bed, looking down at her. Depends on your performance. She bit her lip and said nothing. In those eyes, grievance and resentment were practically overflowing. I reached out and picked up the remote control from the nightstand. This had been specially installed during the renovation, an electric bed with every possible feature. I pressed one of the buttons. The mattress jolted slightly and began to vibrate gently at a certain frequency. Pei Yuhan jumped in shock, her whole body jerking as she frantically tried to sit up. I grabbed her shoulders and pinned her back down. "Don't move." She lay there, her body trembling along with the mattress, her E-cup assets swaying slightly with the motion. Her breathing grew more ragged, her face redder, and the mist in her eyes thicker. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. Her eyelashes were trembling like the wings of a startled butterfly. "He-chong," she called out softly, as if pleading for mercy, yet also as if she were anticipating something. I didn't say a word. I just leaned in and kissed her. This time, she didn't dodge. The moment our lips met, she stiffened for a second, then parted her red lips. As I kissed her, I began to unfasten her clothes. She didn't offer any resistance. Her body just trembled slightly. I lifted my head and looked at her. She lay there, her clothes in disarray and her face flushed. Her eyes were half closed, and tears still clung to her lashes. Her chest rose and fell sharply with her breathing. Her white porcelain bowls seemed to glow under the dim light. I used the dragon claw move from the movies. Damn, they're huge. Although Pei Yuhan had been in a private relationship with that guy Ji Buchong, the Pei family weren't fools. To prevent her from getting on the bus before buying a ticket, the Pei family had kept a very close eye on her. From the time she was a child, she was never alone. She was chauffeured to school, followed by a nanny after class, and trailed by bodyguard from a distance whenever she went out. Ji Buchong had dated her for 6 months, and the most intimate thing they had done was hold hands. And even then, it was a secret handhold while crossing the street. The Pei family had made all of this crystal clear in private when the two families were discussing the marriage alliance. That was why I didn't have the slightest psychological burden as I dealt with her now. All that talk about white moonlights and divorcing in 6 months. She was just spoiled. I unbuttoned my shirt and tossed it aside. Pei Yuhan lay there, her eyes wide as she watched my movements, her entire body shaking. He-chong. Her voice trembled violently. "Please, be gentle." I smiled. "Be gentler." I leaned down, bringing my face close to her ear. "Weren't you quite bold just now? Demanding a divorce, refusing to let me touch you. So you know how to be afraid now." She didn't speak, only biting her lip as her eyes filled with tears again. I didn't waste any more words. That night, I showed her no mercy. Even though Pei Yuhan wept like a rain-drenched pear blossom, I remained relentless, even reaching a third. 2.5 hours later, Pei Yuhan had turned completely limp, lying there motionless. Only her chest was still rising and falling slightly. I rolled off her, leaned against the headboard, and lit a cigarette. Through the swirling smoke, I glanced at her sideways. She lay there, her expression shattered, staring blankly at the ceiling as 2 trails of tears slid from the corners of her eyes and into her hair. She looked utterly pitiable. It took a long while before she recovered from that battered state. She moved with difficulty, trying to sit up, but as soon as she propped up half her body, she hissed in pain and fell back onto the bed. She bit her lip, her eyes reddening again. Seeing her like this, I felt a strange urge to laugh. After another while, she finally struggled to sit up, wrapping herself tightly in the quilt until only her head was visible. The tear stains on her face hadn't dried yet. Her cheeks were burning red, and her eyes were red and swollen. She looked at me, her lips trembling, her voice incredibly raspy. "He-chong." I exhaled a puff of smoke. "Yeah." She took a deep breath, as if gathering a great deal of courage. "Can you agree to it now?" I raised an eyebrow. "Agree to what?" She froze for a moment, and then her eyes reddened once more. You clearly said earlier that it depended on my performance. I've already given you the most important thing I have. What more do you want?" Her voice grew smaller and smaller until the last few words were barely audible. I looked at her, feigning confusion. "What's what?" Pei Yuhan's face flushed a deep crimson instantly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words failed her. Finally, she gritted her teeth and, enduring her shame, spat out each word slowly. Divorce. Up on. Expiry. I laughed. I was fucking speechless. What the hell was going on in this woman's head? Even after being handled like this, she's still thinking about that Jibo-chan guy? I stubbed out my cigarette on the nightstand and turned to face her. Hey, Yuhan, do you still not understand the situation? She shrank back, wrapping the quilt tighter around herself, until only her eyes were visible as she looked at me. In the partnership between our families, the He family is providing exclusive mineral rights. Do you have any idea how much that's worth? 5 cities, 3 years. At a conservative estimate, it's this much. I held up 3 fingers. She blinked but remained silent. 3 billion. You still there? The money the Pei family put in is only half that amount. Her eyes flickered. She finally showed some reaction. And now you're telling me to divorce you in a year? I leaned in close to her. Do you think that's possible? She bit her lip and stayed silent. Stubbornness and resentment still lingered in her eyes, but they were mostly overwhelmed by confusion and helplessness. After a long while, she finally whispered, Then we can each do our own thing. I froze for a moment. What? She took a deep breath, as if summoning all her courage, and looked up at me. Just like the other couples in our circle, we could be a couple on the surface, but live our own lives in private. You can go find whoever you want, and I won't interfere. I just need to wait for him to come back. As she spoke, her voice trailed off into a sob again. I looked at her, silent for a long time. I laughed out of sheer anger. I really was laughing from the absurdity of it all. How could a man as shrewd as Uncle Pei have a daughter with such a terminal case of love brain? Each doing our own thing, I reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at me. Pei Yuhan, are you actually stupid, or are you just pretending? The pressure of my grip hurt her, and her eyes welled with tears again. That Jibo-chan of yours has no money and no talent. He's done nothing but use his mouth to spin you around in circles. If he really cared, where was he before? He didn't dare come when your family was watching you. He didn't dare fight for you during the marriage alliance. And now he wants you to stay chaste for him here. You have the nerve to call a man like that your white moonlight. Her tears finally broke and rolled down her cheeks. That's not true. He's not like what you say. Then what is he like? She stopped speaking and just cried. I let go of her chin and wiped the tears from her face. Enough. Stop dreaming. We'll talk after I've had my fun. She snapped her head up, staring at me with wide eyes, her face full of disbelief. You? What do you mean? I didn't say a word. I simply reached out and hooked my fingers under her gills again. Her entire body jolted, her voice pitching up. He-chong, what are you doing? Giving you a shot. What shot? A vaccine. Oh, and a PCR test too. Nearly 4 hours later, she finally went silent, lying there with her eyes half closed and her face covered in tear tracks. She was still mumbling something in a low voice. I leaned in to listen. Jibo-chan, I'm sorry. I've let you down. The next morning, the space beside me was already empty. I reached out to feel the sheets. They were cold. She had been gone for a while. Sitting up, I immediately saw the patch of dried blood in the middle of the bed. I stared at the stain for a few seconds as the images from last night flashed through my mind. TSK. I threw back the covers, got out of bed, and pressed the intercom. 10 minutes later, Gong Xiaoya pushed the door open. She was trained personally by my father and is 2 years older than me. She has been with me since I took over the He group. People call her a secretary, but she is more capable than most women. She is efficient, tight-lipped, and never asks unnecessary questions. President He. She stood at the door, her gaze sweeping over the disheveled bed without a change in expression. Miss Pei left at 6:15 this morning. I arranged for a driver to see her off. I nodded, asking while putting on my shirt, where did she go? Gong Xiaoya's expression faltered for a moment. Speak. She cleared her throat. Miss Pei went to the City People's Hospital. She registered for the proctology department. My hand stopped fastening the buttons. Proctology? As the scenes from last night replayed in my head, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. This woman certainly cares about her physical well-being. Gong Xiaoye remained at the door, her face still impassive, but the tips of her ears were slightly flushed. I had worked with her for many years, yet this was the first time I had seen her react this way. "That's enough," I said, waving a hand. "Get the car ready. We're going to the office." The He Group's headquarters is located in the most prosperous district of the city center, a 68-story skyscraper. The top 3 floors serve as the executive office area. My office is on the 66th floor, a full 300 square meters, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the city skyline. By the time I arrived at the office, Gong Xiaoye had already prepared today's reports. "Mr. He, this is last month's financial summary, the performance reports for each branch, and the documents requiring your signature." I sat in my executive chair, flipping through the reports while listening to her briefing. The numbers were all within expectations. There were no major issues. After finishing the last report, I looked up. "Where is Ji Buchang's file?" Gong Xiaoye was prepared. She pulled a dossier from her folder and placed it in front of me. "It's all here, very detailed." I opened the dossier. The information inside was even thicker than I had imagined. Photos, chat logs, transfer vouchers, hotel records. Everything was there. I flipped through the pages one by one, the smile on my lips deepening. Ji Buchang, 26 years old, a native of Jiangsheng, born into an ordinary family with working-class parents. He attended a second-tier university in the provincial capital, majoring in marketing. Starting from his sophomore year, he had wormed his way into the city's circle of second-generation wealthy heirs. How? With his face. In the photos, Ji Buchang was indeed handsome, with refined features, a slender build, and 2 dimples when he smiled. The file noted that he had high EQ, was a smooth talker, and knew how to please women. Translated, he lived off his silver tongue. During his senior year, he was introduced to Pei Yuhan through a friend. Back then, Pei Yuhan was only a freshman, sheltered so strictly by her family that she had seen little of the world. For a man like Ji Buchang, who had been toughened by the real world, handling a naive girl like her was far too easy. Sweet talk, gentle attentiveness, plus a few push-and-pull tactics, and he had won her over in 6 months. But the Pei family was not to be trifled with. Pei Yuhan was followed 24 hours a day. Ji Buchang couldn't find an opportunity to take a step further. Holding hands was the absolute limit. Anything more intimate was out of the question. In their graduation year, Ji Buchang told Pei Yuhan that he wanted to go abroad for further studies. Without a second thought, Pei Yuhan gave him all her save allowance and secretly scraped together another sum behind her family's back. The total came to nearly 2 million. Ji Buchang took the money and went abroad. But he didn't go for further studies. He went to Australia, enrolled in a local diploma mill to muddle through, and then focused most of his energy on another matter: sucking up to rich women. The information clearly stated that over the 2 years Ji Buchang spent in Australia, he had maintained long-term relationships with 3 women in succession. The first was the daughter of a domestic real estate developer who was studying abroad in Australia. Ji Buchang served as her study companion boyfriend for over a year. The hotel check-in records were dense, and there were also quite a few transfer records. But in the end, she graduated and returned to China, dumping him directly. The second was the wife of a local Chinese wealthy businessman whose husband was Changnan in China while she stayed in Australia to take care of their child. Ji Buchang worked as her fitness coach for half a year. Later, the wealthy businessman found out, and Ji Buchang almost had his dick broken. He fled overnight. The third was the most interesting. She was a member of a delegation from China, in her 50s, whose husband was a powerful figure in some place. Ji Buchang met her at a cocktail party and went to a hotel with her the same night. They stayed in on-and-off contact for over half a year, and his Tuho was extremely attentive. But she only treated him like a dog. When she was happy, she'd toss him a couple of bones. When she wasn't, she'd humiliate him to the extreme. After 2 years of sucking up, Ji Buchang didn't get any substantial benefits. That was when he remembered Pei Yuhan who was still utterly devoted to him back in China. At the end of the information were chat records from the past few months. Jibuchong, Yuhan, I miss you so much. Jibuchong, wait for me, I'll be back soon. Jibuchong, you must wait for me. I only love you in this life. Pei Yuhan, I'll wait for you. Pei Yuhan, Wuchong, my family is forcing me into a marriage alliance. What should I do? Jibuchong, just deal with it for now. Wait for me to come back. Jibuchong, when I get back, I'll take you away. Jibuchong, we'll elope. When I saw the word elope, I couldn't help but laugh. This loser was quite good at drawing pie in the sky. I kept scrolling down. The latest message was from 2 days ago. Jibuchong, Yuhan, I still have some things to handle here. I might be back a few months late. Jibuchong, will you wait for me a little longer, please? Pei Yuhan did not reply, because 2 days ago, she had been pressured by her family into registering our marriage. I closed the folder, leaned back in my executive chair, and lit a cigarette. Gong Xiaoya stood beside me, waiting for me to speak. Where is he now? Still in Australia, Gong Xiaoya said. He's been contacting domestic companies recently, looking for a job. A job? I exhaled a cloud of smoke. What could a man like him possibly do? The corner of Gong Xiaoya's mouth curled slightly. As far as I know, he sent out several resumes, all to companies that have business dealings with the Pei family. I raised an eyebrow. He wants to use that channel to return to the country. Presumably, Gong Xiaoya said. He's short on cash right now. He needs a respectable job after returning to continue pursuing Miss Pei. I laughed. That useless fool certainly has high hopes. I stubbed out the cigarette and looked at Gong Xiaoya. Keep a close eye on him. Report any movement to me immediately. Understood. Gong Xiaoya paused, then asked, President do you need me to cause some trouble for him? I thought about it and waved my hand. No need. Let him come back on his own. Gong Xiaoya was stunned for a moment, but she quickly caught on. Are you planning to? I smiled and said nothing. There are some things Pei Yuhan needs to see with her own eyes, to see exactly what kind of trash her precious white moonlight really is. If I were the one to say it, she definitely wouldn't believe me. She might even think I was trying to drive a wedge between them. She has to see it for herself. When I returned home that evening, the lights in the living room were on. Pei Yuhan was sitting on the sofa. Hearing the door open, her body visibly stiffened, but she didn't look back. I changed my shoes and walked over. She was wearing loose loungewear, her hair draped over her shoulders, curled up in the corner of the sofa with her phone clutched in her hand, the screen still glowing. Seeing me approach, she instinctively tucked the phone behind her back. I pretended not to notice and sat down right next to her. She shifted toward the other end, putting some distance between us. Was your hospital checkup okay? I asked casually. Pei Yuhan froze. She snapped her head around to glare at me, her eyes wide as saucers. You're stalking me? Her voice rose an octave, and her face flushed red at a visible speed. Chong, what right do you have to stalk me? Leaning back against the sofa, I watched her bristling like a cat and said unhurriedly, Ever since I found out you had a white moonlight, I notified the security teams of the He and Pei families. I've assigned a dedicated 24-hour security detail for you. Pei Yuhan's face went from flushed to bright red, then from red to purple. She stood up abruptly, glaring down at me with her chest heaving violently. Those size E assets of hers bounced up and down, enough to make one's head spin. What do you mean by that? Her voice was trembling. What do you mean, assigned 24-hour security? Are you afraid I'll run away? Or are you afraid I'll bring shame to your family? Chong, is that the kind of person I am in your eyes? I looked at her and spoke slowly. Based on your performance last night, I paused. It's hard to say. Pei Yuhan stood there as if struck by lightning. Then, her face turned the color of a cooked shrimp at a visible speed. The redness spread from her cheeks to the tips of her ears, then down to her neck. Even her exposed collarbones turned a shade of pink. Chong! She shrieked, looking like a human steam engine with smoke practically billowing from her head. Then, she lunged at me. Her hands came at me recklessly, pounding and hitting my body. But that bit of strength wasn't even enough to scratch an itch. I just sat there, letting her hit me as she pleased. As she kept hitting, she was the one who got tired first. She panted for breath, her eyes turning red. "You're a bully." Her voice carried a sob. "You only know how to pick on me." Looking at her like this, I felt a strange urge to laugh. Last night, she was acting all high and mighty like a queen, but today, she's a pouting little girl? I reached out, and my hand landed directly on her breast. Pei Yuhan shuddered, her voice going up an octave. "He Chong, what are you doing?" Her eyes were wide, filled with utter disbelief. I looked at her and smiled. "Just a physical checkup." "What checkup?" Her words were cut short by my movements. Her face flushed even deeper, and the steam rising from her head seemed to thicken. You're truly shameless." Her voice trembled violently, yet she still clung to a pathetic bit of stubbornness. "With such practiced hands, you must have ruined quite a few women." I arched an eyebrow. "Ruined?" I leaned in close to her ear. "Then why were you crying so hard last night?" Pei Yuhan's face flushed a deep crimson. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. In the end, she could only glare at me, her eyes filled with shame, anger, and something else that was impossible to describe. I didn't waste any more words on her. To make this woman submit, the path of music is the only shortcut. I swept her up in my arms. "Ah!" She let out a startled cry, reflexively wrapping her arms around my neck. By the time she regained her senses, she was already lying on that 3-by-3-meter bed. "He Chong, you." Before she could finish, I had already silenced her. She let out a few muffled protests, which gradually faded away. After a long while, I let her go. She lay there, gasping for air, her face completely flushed. Her eyes were watery as she looked at me, her lips trembling slightly. "He Chong." Her voice was incredibly soft. "Can we? Today?" "No." I cut her off directly. She was stunned for a moment, and her eyes reddened again. But I still heard. Her voice grew softer and softer until the last few words were almost inaudible. Looking at her pitiful appearance, my heart softened for a split second. But only for a split second. "Then do it yourself." Pei Yuhan froze. She stared at me with wide eyes, her expression shifting from grievance to disbelief. "Me, myself?" "Yes." She bit her lip and remained silent. Shame and resentment were practically overflowing from her eyes. After a long while, she whispered, "I don't know how." I smirked. "If you don't know how, you can learn." Her face flushed even redder. Finally, she took a deep breath, as if she had made a major decision, and slowly sat down. In the days that followed, I truly learned the meaning of the word training. Pei Yuhan was a woman who appeared cold and proud on the surface, carrying herself like a queen, but in reality, she was incredibly soft to the core. As long as you were assertive enough, she would listen obediently. She had claimed I couldn't touch her, but after the first time, everything followed naturally. She had talked about getting a divorce in 6 months, but after I handled her a few times, she never mentioned it again. She had talked about some white moonlight first love, but later, she barely even looked at her phone. I eventually realized she had a typical people-pleasing personality. She had been raised too strictly. No one had taught her how to resist. So, she only knew one way to deal with someone forceful: submission. If you were a bit harsh with her, she would curl into a ball. If you were a bit nice to her, she'd want to give you everything she had. At first, I found it refreshing, but later I got used to it. Anyway, life went on like that. During the day, I was busy with company matters, and at night, I went home to discipline her. Sometimes it was in the living room, sometimes in the bathroom, and sometimes on that 3-by-3-meter bed. All of her firsts were taken by me, from her initial awkwardness and stiffness to her gradual cooperation, and then later. I have to say, once a woman gets a taste for it, she becomes quite wild. One time, I worked overtime until 2 in the morning. When I pushed open the bedroom door, I found she was still awake. She was lying in bed, curled under the covers with only her head showing, her eyes shining as she looked at me. "You're back." Her voice was soft. I gave a grunt of acknowledgement and went to the bathroom for a shower. When I came out, she had already crawled out from under the covers. She was wearing one of my white shirts with only 2 buttons done up. The collar was wide open, and her E-cup assets were partially visible. She knelt on the bed, looking at me with a slightly flushed face. "Hubby." I raised an eyebrow. She bit her lip and didn't say a word, only reaching her hand out toward me. Those eyes were watery, filled with a hint of anticipation, a hint of shyness, and a hint of... I smiled. That night, we were up until dawn before finally falling asleep. Life went on like this, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. I had been keeping someone on Ji Buchang's tail the entire time. He certainly knew how to keep busy. After failing to make it in Australia, he began pulling strings everywhere to find a job. First, he joined a foreign company that had business dealings with the Pei family. He worked there for half a year with mediocre performance. Then, one day, he was suddenly transferred back to China. He entered the Pei group and became a low-level supervisor. One didn't even need to think to know whose handiwork that was. Pei Yuhan thought she had hidden it well. For the past half year, she had been incredibly well-behaved in front of me. She didn't dare to disagree with a single word I said. She followed my every lead without question. I actually thought she had truly forgotten that white moonlight of hers. And yet, the moment he returned, she couldn't wait to get him into the company. This woman, she really is fine. I like to see exactly what she's up to. That afternoon, I was in a meeting at the office when my phone vibrated. It was a message from security. Miss Pei went to the Pei Group headquarters at 3 this afternoon. She is currently in the CEO's office with Ji Buchang. I glanced at the time. 3:02. I closed the folder and stood up. Meeting adjourned. We'll continue tomorrow. Gong Xiaoya was stunned for a moment, but she asked nothing and simply nodded. 10 minutes later, my car stopped in front of the Pei Group building. The security guard at the door recognized me and welcomed me in with obsequious bows. "President He, who are you here to see? Don't worry about me." I headed straight into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. It's been half a year. Time to close the net. The elevator doors opened, and I walked straight toward the CEO's office. The female secretary at the door turned pale when she saw me. She stood up, trying to block my way. Mr. He, Miss Pei is meeting with a guest." I ignored her completely and pushed the door open. Inside the office, 2 people were standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Pei Yuhan was wearing a beige dress, her back to the door, talking to the man in front of her. The man had his back to me as well. He was tall and slender, dressed in a sharp suit, looking down at Pei Yuhan with an expression of deep affection. Ji Buchang. Hearing the door open, both of them turned their heads simultaneously. When Pei Yuhan saw me, she froze as if struck by lightning. In an instant, a flurry of emotions flashed through her eyes: panic, guilt, bewilderment. Then, reflexively, she lowered her head and walked quickly to my side. The movement was so practiced it seemed etched into her bones. These past 6 months of conditioning had turned it into an instinctive reaction. No matter the time or place, her first reaction upon seeing me was to lower her head, walk over, and stand obediently. "Oh, husband." Her voice was as faint as a mosquito's buzz. She kept her head down, not daring to look at me. "What are you doing here?" I looked at her without saying a word. Ji Buchang stood there, the expression on his face quite the sight. He clearly hadn't expected to see me here. In his eyes, shock came first, followed by embarrassment. "Mr. He forced a smile and reached out his hand. "I've heard so much about you. I'm Ji Buchang, formerly of the Australian branch." I ignored him completely. I reached out, grabbed Pei Yuhan's waist, and pulled her in my arms. She trembled all over and looked up at me, her eyes filled with panic. "Hubby," I didn't give her a chance to speak. I lowered my head and kissed her directly. A French kiss, right in front of Ji Buchang. Pei Yuhan froze in my arms, letting out a couple of muffled whimpers, and then, slowly, she went limp. Her hands were pressed against my chest, trying to push me away, but she couldn't muster any strength. After a long while, I finally let go of her. She slumped weakly in my arms, gasping for breath, her face completely flushed. Her eyes were watery as she looked at me, her lips trembling. Hubby. Her voice was incredibly soft, tinged with a hint of coquettishness and a plea for mercy. I looked at her and smiled. Then, I turned my head and looked at Jibwachong. He was still standing there, his expression frozen. His eyes were full of disbelief, and a trace of jealousy. Looking at him like that, I felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. Jibwachong, right? I held Pei Yuhan close, looking at him with a faint, knowing smile. I heard you're an old friend of Yuhan's? Jibwachong's expression flickered, but he quickly forced a smile. Why, yes. Yuhan and I were university classmates. We haven't seen each other in years. I just returned to the country today and came by to catch up. Catching up. I raised an eyebrow. Does catching up require a meeting in the CEO's office? Jibwachong's smile stiffened. Yuhan was the one who arranged this, Before Jibwachong could finish, Pei Yuhan broke free from my embrace, her face turning deathly pale as she cut him off. Jibwachong, get out. Her voice was trembling, and she looked utterly panicked. Jibwachong froze for a moment, looking back and forth between Pei Yuhan and me, his expression a sight to behold. Yuhan, you. Get out. Pei Yuhan nearly screamed. Get out now. Jibwachong's expression flickered, but he finally squeezed out a smile and nodded to me. Mister, let's talk another time then. With that, he hurried out of the office, the door clicking shut behind him. The office fell silent in an instant. Pei Yuhan stood where she was, her head bowed and her hands wringing together, her body trembling slightly. Hubby, she whispered, looking up at me with eyes full of panic and guilt. I can explain. I didn't say a word, walking straight toward her. She reflexively took a step back until her calves hit the desk, causing her to lean backward. I grabbed her by the wrist, pulled her back toward me, and then pinned her directly onto the desk. She let out a cry of surprise as she was forced on her back on the desk, her long hair fanning out across the surface, her eyes wide with shock. Hubby, what are you doing? I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. Explain. I looked at her. What exactly do you want to explain? Her lips trembled, and her eyes instantly rimmed with red. I just wanted to see him once. He just returned to the country and said he wanted to see me. I didn't have any other intentions. No other intentions? I let out a cold laugh. If you had no other intentions, then why did you go behind my back to get him a job at the Pay Corporation? Her tears finally fell. I'm sorry. Hubby, I'm sorry. I just had a momentary lapse of heart. He begged me for help and Before she could finish, I had already started moving my hands. Her whole body shuddered, and her voice shifted in pitch. Hubby, no. My hand paused for a moment. She hurriedly grabbed my hand and looked at me with reddened eyes, looking incredibly pitiful. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. A department meeting. It's very important. She was panting, her chest heaving violently, looking soft and vulnerable. Hubby, wait until I'm finished with the meeting. When we get home tonight, you can punish me however you want. I glanced at my watch. 20 minutes? Not enough. But I had another way. I gripped her wrist and pulled her up from the desk. Where's the conference room? She was dazed, staring at me blankly. I asked you. Where's the conference room? She reflexively pointed toward the door. It's right at the end of the hallway. Without giving her a chance to react, I dragged her straight out. Hubby, what are you doing? She panicked, desperately trying to pull back, but with her meager strength, there was no way she could break free. I yanked open the office door and dragged her toward the conference room. The female secretary at the door witnessed this scene, her eyes widening and her mouth hanging open wide enough to fit an egg. I didn't even acknowledge her and pushed the conference room door open. It was empty inside, a long conference table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the blinds were half drawn. I pulled Pei Yuhan inside and slammed the door shut behind us. Hubby, she was completely panicked, backing up against the conference table, her hands bracing against the surface as her whole body trembled. I was wrong. I was really wrong. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her voice thick with a sob. Can you please go out for a moment? When we get home tonight, you can punish me however you like. The department meeting is about to start. It's all my subordinates. They can't see us like this. I looked at her pitiful expression, but the fire in my heart didn't subside at all. What you did today has left me very frustrated. She froze for a moment, and then her face flushed bright red. She understood what I meant. Honey, her voice was trembling violently. Maybe I should postpone the meeting? Let's go back to the office. We absolutely cannot do this here. She reached for her phone as she spoke. I pinned her hand down. No need. Her eyes widened, filled with sheer panic. I checked my watch. There were 8 minutes left before the meeting started. I smiled. Then, under her horrified gaze, I ducked down and crawled under the conference table. Hee-chang. Her voice cracked. She crouched down to look at me, her face already crimson. Sweetheart, please, I'm begging you. Come out. She pressed her hands together, tears almost falling. I won't see Ji Buchang ever again, all right? I'll never contact him again. Just please come out. I looked at her and reached out to pat her black stocking legs. Hold your meeting. Don't worry about me. She froze completely. Just then, the conference room door was pushed open. President Pei, a middle-aged man's voice drifted in. Pei Yuhan stood up abruptly, her movement so sudden she nearly hit the table. I'm coming. Her voice shook violently as she struggled to compose herself. I hid under the table, watching her calves, wrapped in black silk, as they trembled slightly. People began to enter the conference room, one after another. The sound of footsteps, chairs being pulled out, and the rustling of documents filled the air. President Pei, you don't look well. Are you feeling all right? A female voice asked. And no, Pei Yuhan's voice still carried a trace of a tremble. Let's begin. The meeting started. Some reported on their work, some raised questions, and others discussed proposals. The sounds of reports and discussions rose and fell in succession, but her legs were shaking more and more violently. This proposal. We'll discuss it later. Next. Just then, a familiar voice rang out. President Pei, regarding my assessment for this quarter. I raised an eyebrow. Ji Buchang? He was in this meeting too? This was getting interesting. I looked at that pair of silken legs. They were trembling even harder now. President Pei, I've completed 120% of my performance targets this quarter. I was wondering if you could. It's fine. Pei Yuhan's voice was shaking uncontrollably, every word sounding as if it were squeezed through her teeth. We'll talk later. Her legs began to quiver, the heels of her shoes tapping lightly against the floor, making a faint clack-clack sound. President Pei? Ji Buchang's voice sounded confused. Are you okay? I am fine. Her voice jumped an octave before she forced it back down. That's all for today. Meeting adjourned. But President Pei, there's still 2 more items on the agenda. We'll talk about it tomorrow. The sound of chairs scraping, footsteps, and murmuring voices followed. What's wrong with President Pei today? I don't know. She looked terrible. Is she not feeling well? The footsteps quickened. The door was pulled open, then shut. Silence fell over the conference room. I lifted the tablecloth and crawled out from under the table. She was standing by the conference table, hands braced against the surface, her whole body hunched over as she gasped for breath. Her lips were so dry they were peeling. She instinctively licked them. Then, she reached for the water glass on the table. Just as the glass touched her lips, I reached out and snatched it away. She froze, looking up at me with reddened eyes, her face full of grievance. Hubby, I'm thirsty. Her voice was raspy and pitiful. I set the water glass aside, tossing it onto the conference table. Thirsty? I'll feed you myself. She looked at me, unsure of what I was doing. Without giving her a chance to react, I grabbed her by the waist and pressed her down onto the conference table.
Everyone, that's all for today's story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really means a lot to me. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If it's not to your liking, please be kind. Your support is the only motivation for me to keep creating original stories. Goodbye.